Hello, my name is Alexander Wijayanto. In this video, I would like to talk about the comparison between Indonesian horror and Western horror. The history of Indonesian horror genre ties directly with the government of the New Order, which controlled a significant part of the daily life in average Indonesian citizen. During the New Order, the media in Indonesia are heavily regulated and controlled by the state. Any media that judge having a subversive or content that defied the government authority are banned by the state. The early movies in Indonesia are primarily propaganda movies, such as movies about the struggle for the independence of Indonesia against the foreign powers such as Dutch and Japan. The movie about the betrayal massacre of the Indonesian Communist Political Party was widely published and approved by the government. Any movies that was judged by the New Order government as potential defiant or subversive are banned and prosecuted by the state. After the fall of the New Order regime, the contemporary film in Indonesia became much more varied and diverse, with a lack of censorship and bans from the government, although films still under censorship from the religious and cultural group or agency. One of the most prominent genres that emerged from this is a horror genre. The horror movies genre in Indonesia have emerged as early as the early 20th century. The ghosts and monsters of Indonesian horror movie are directly lifted or inspired from the folk stories. The examples can be seen such as Kuntilanak and Pocong. The early horror movies are primarily set at the rural communities of Indonesia. Although, as time progressed and the country are more urbanized, the setting of the horror movie changed from rural communities to the urban communities with movies about ghosts in abandoned hospitals or schools in order to better connect with the audience. If we compare to the Western horror movie, the scope of the Indonesian horror movies are local, with monsters directly lifted from the folk stories, while the Western horror stories are much larger in scope with genre of cosmic horror story as horror stories at the scope of universal scale. There are some similarities between Indonesia and Western horror movie, where the antagonists of supernatural are usually supernatural creatures that are rarely fought, and most of the time the protagonists run away rather than facing it head-on. However, the main difference that can be observed between the Indonesian horror and Western horror is the scope of the setting. As stated before, the setting for Indonesian horror usually located at rural and urban community. Abandoned hospital and grave is a very common setting for Indonesian horror. In comparison, the cosmic horror, which can be seen in Western horror, set the setting that encompasses the entire universe. This is why the reason the genre of this horror is called the cosmic horror story. Usually, the antagonist for this kind of story is called a term of eldritch abomination. In essence, eldritch abomination is an insane mockery of natural law and order. It is a creature that isn't supposed to or could exist, but it exists nonetheless. A person who witnessed such abomination usually driven mad by what they seen. They usually cannot be fought or even seen, and the protagonists usually hope is either escape or hide. The most famous example of the cosmic horror story is Lovecraftian horror created by H.P. Lovecraft. Its influence can be seen in many literature, movies, and games, even birthing a concept called Lovecraft Light. In Indonesia, the concept of cosmic horror stories is relatively unknown concept to the viewer of horror movie in Indonesia. It can be concluded that the horror movies in Indonesia ties very closely with the population of Indonesia, which can be seen by the setting in which the horror movie is paralleled by the urbanization of Indonesian population from rural communities to the big cities. The scope of horror movies by comparison of Western horror movie that incorporate science fiction and cosmic horror elements. The horror movies in Indonesia are a lot more local and mundane, with horror movies at the setting of communities and cities. Monsters and ghosts lifted directly from local folk stories. That's it all. Thank you.